Sadiq here with another Affinity tutorial at the request for one of the viewers. Wanted to just go over again with regards to doing a panorama and putting a border around it and annotating it or putting a title on it, but not just a title, but a title that stands out, so it's behind a label, if you like. So in front of us we can see here a panorama of a scene off the Northern Ireland coast, and it's made up of 3 images stitched together and a border put round it. Same technique we've used before, but I'll just go over it again. And then in addition to that, we've put a shape with rounded corners, and made it semi-transparent, and then of course chosen our font and put a label on it or any kind of text that you want. So we'll go through each one of those steps step by step through this. So let's get to it. So first of all, we want to, in Affinity Photo, what we want to do is to go to File and New Panorama. So we start with the panorama first. So this is an automated process, works really well. Clearly you've got to take your initial panoramic images, the raw files for the panorama, appropriately, which if you're not sure about that, then if you click on the link below, then you'll get some information with regards to that. So rather than going into that now, that's more of a photography issue, but suffice to say you do need to follow some basics, but follow the link and you'll find that. Okay, first of all, we click here to add some pictures. Now, I'm going to do the same image that you see in front of you. Okay, so we go to the images that we want and just select the ones that you want. And I'm going to select these 3. Click open, and those are the 3 we want. Here you can choose to disable one or more if you've got too many of them, if you wanted to do that, but I've never really had any reason to do it. Then click Stitch Panorama and then just wait a few seconds. And it's done an initial attempt at stitching it. Click OK here. And what it will do, it will bring those images into a new document. And as you can see, it did that fairly quickly. Clearly, if you had a higher resolution images, or if you had 5 or 6 images, it would take a bit longer, but on most machines it only takes a few seconds. Now, the thing to view on this is that before I click apply on the top left here, is you can see that because of the way the images weren't aligned quite accurately, what we've got is a lot of negative area. In fact, no pixels at all. Now you can crop that heavily, so let me click apply here. I could at this stage crop it heavily using the crop tool and say, well, I can bring this in at the side and so on, but I'm not going to do that because there's another technique we can use within Affinity called in painting, where it will paint in these pixels by doing a sampling of the surrounding pixels, and in most instances it really works well. So let's give this a go. It certainly worked well on the previous images you saw. So let's just click cancel for the stitch. We don't, sorry, for the crop. We don't want to crop it. So what we want to do is now select this area, and the easy way to do it, you don't need to do it manually. If you go to select, go down to alpha range, so all the see-through pixels, and then partially transparent. So this will pick up, as you can just see there, all the pixels on the outside that are empty. Okay, so we've done that successfully. Command and 0 to center it all up. Then, to be absolutely sure we don't have a gap between what we've selected and the image itself, what we can do is go back to select in the menu and then grow and shrink. And what we want to do is grow the selection so it eats into your image by 1 or 2 pixels. So here, just highlight and type in the number 2. And then once we've typed in 2, so we're adding 2 extra pixels to the selection, click apply. Now when I zoom in, you'll see that the marching ants dotted line has actually come in by 2 pixels. And to show you that it is 2 pixels, if I go to an area where the variation in the sky is sufficient where you'll be able to see that it is 2 pixels. There you can just about see there's 1 square there, 1 square there. So it's gone into it by 2 pixels. 1 or 2 pixels is sufficient. Depends on your resolution of your image. If it's very high resolution and there's a lot of pixels in your image, you could go up to 3 or 4 pixels, but certainly not too much, not too many. So now that's the selection's done. That's step 1 is select. Step 2 is grow and shrink the selection. In our case, grow. And this third step is go to edit in the menu and down to in paint. And as soon as we click on in paint, it'll take a few seconds and it's sampling the pixels, and it will paint in pixels by extending the canvas out so that it fills it right to the edge. And clearly, if it does it well, if you can sample well, then you'll get a really good result. Now that should just complete in a few seconds. There we go. And now, as you can see, you can still see the selection area to say that was the original image here, and I've sampled and put in pixels that are fresh on the outside, and you can't tell. Sometimes you might be able to tell a bit of a repeating pattern. I know it's happened to me before. So for example, by the rocks, always zoom in to double check it, but at the moment, oh, you can just there. Can you see that cliff edge there is sort of got a bit of a step to it? But seeing as that, you know, clips do have steps to it, you could argue that that's acceptable. But if it isn't acceptable, you could go in and massage that by doing a little bit of cloning on that. But in fact, what we're going to do is to put a border around it. By putting a border around it, it eats into the image a little bit all the way around, so that will eliminate any issues right round the edge. But if you wanted to use the clone stamp in that little area, of course that's perfectly fine, and that will sort that problem out. Deselect the selection either by pressing the escape key on the keyboard as I've just done, or just going to select and deselect there. Okay, so now we've done that, let's put a board. Of course, if you wanted to edit the exposure, edit the white balance, edit the let's do that. In fact, if I just go put an adjustment layer and we go to curves, and let's just put in a curves adjustment layer at this stage, just because we can. And you might want to make it a bit moodier, the image, but without ruining the original. Okay, so it's a bit dark down the bottom, so we don't want to do too much. Okay, so let's say we're happy with that. I'm going to click merge here because I want to merge that adjustment layer with your background layer, because now I want to put a border on it. Now we've done this before, a couple of ways of doing it, but we'll do the quick method. Go to FX panel, and then in the effects panel, just sorry, not there, go to the effects panel next to the layers, and what we want is outline. Click on the gear icon to pull out that palette. Always do that because it gives you a few more options. You can see it better as well, particularly if you've got a large monitor or screen. We want the border to be on the inside. It won't work on the outside. We want it to be solid color in this case. We don't want it to be black. What in fact what I want it to be is white, because that will lend itself better to it. But you can pick whichever color you want, and then just change the radius of that border, and all being well, you should get that border. Now I'm going to make the border quite large because of that issue with the cliff there, but of course that's a personal choice. Let's say we'll do it there, and that gives me a substantial border, but also it hides that slight defect there, so I don't have to use the clone stamp. I'm happy with that. Click OK. Now let's put the label on here, and of course this general principle applies to any type of shape you want to use. But in the left hand side tools panel, you've got a number of, normally we use the rectangle tool, but what we want to use here is the rounded rectangle tool, which just gives you rounded corners. So just click and drag to create the sort of roughly the size that you want, and then click on the move tool on the top and then just center it. And if you've got your magnetic snapping tool enabled, which in most cases you should, leave that on, then as you move to the center point you get the green line to tell you it's centered left to right. Clearly we don't want it to be centered in the middle of the image, but we just want it to be centered left and right, so we could put it there. Now, do I want a solid white background? No, I don't. So we go to the fill layer here, and we want to reduce the opacity so that it's semi-transparent. So you can just about see through, but of course you can choose whatever level you want. You might want it to be very subtle, like tracing paper, but let's just say we'll have it at around about there. I don't want a border around that that's a different color, but of course if you wanted a border around it you could. So you click on the stroke, it's none at the moment, change it to a particular stroke, give it a few pixels. Maybe you don't want it black, but if you wanted it black you could do, but I'm actually not going to, I'm going to leave it. We're going to leave it. So let's just zoom in. You can see that there's a black stroke around that. Okay, now all that's left is that go back to the layers palette on the right hand side, make sure that your shaped layer is selected, not the background, because we want to put some text and we want to put it on there. So make sure that's selected, click on the text tool, initially just you know, roughly position it fairly large, and then just click and drag to give you a rough idea what we want it to be. And if we just put in an appropriate a label, and then just triple click it to select all the text, and then change the font. You can obviously do that initially. Find a suitable font. Let's just find it. Have this brush grip, which always looks good, and we want to position it in the center, but let's just increase the size of it a little bit first. And then the move tool, always click on the move tool, and then allows you to move it. And because we want it in the center of the label, it will give us that option. So the green line is in the center left and right, and the red line now is giving us the center of, not the center of the picture, that obviously would be up here, but it also detects that there's a label underneath it, a shape underneath it, and if you position it, then we now know that that text is within the center of that. If we then want to subsequently resize, but resize them both together, we can group those two layers, so the text layer and the shape layer, select them both together, right click, and then group. And once they're grouped, you can see there, if I click there in the layers panel, they are there separately, but they are now grouped. So if you move the whole group will move, and you just position it where you want to. If I resized it, everything will resize together, and let's just say we want it there, and you position it where you want to, and of course any other changes you make, it will make to all of them. If you want to ungroup them, just right click on the group and ungroup, and that way now I can move individual ones, or if I want to change the color of the text, so select that, and at the moment the text is black. But if I triple click it, and maybe I don't want it to be black, maybe we want it to be grey, again something a bit more subtle, and there we go, all finished. And of course we'd want to export that out. We just go to File, Export, JPEG, or whichever file format you want. Make sure that the file size, remember these are 3 photographs stitched together, so it's going to be larger than the original one photograph as a JPEG. Plus we've also added some extra information on as well, but you could reduce the file size there by reducing the quality of it. Just by reducing it from 100% to 92%, it's dropped the file size from 10 megabytes to just under 3. So really you could afford to only marginally reduced the quality of the JPEG, and you've knocked 2/3 off the file size. So that's something to bear in mind if you think that the file might be too big to email, or for printing purposes, or just for sharing purposes. So that's halved it, and I've only reduced it by 2%. So I'm happy with that. Click export, and of course give it a suitable title, a position where you want to put it, and then save it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Have a go and leave some comments and thoughts and suggestions, and don't forget the link as well. Thanks. Bye.